love is patient and kind, with a generous mind, holds forgiveness for all, rejoices when you're lifted, and it cries when you fall. Someday I'll see the truth as plain as day. All of my doubt and fears will melt away. Till then I'm satisfied to live each day in His love, 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 in His love.
I love it. Ooh. I love it.
My other instrument.
There we go. Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day to all you Valentines. Nice to see all of you. I was thinking about Valentine's Day and lesson for today, and the lesson is actually, we're starting a series of lessons based on an amazing work called The Bond, How to Fix Your Falling Down World. And that actually is a new subtitle to it. I have an older book, and the older subtitle is Connecting Through the Space Between Us. And I really like that title as well. So I think we're really going to have some good times exploring and understanding the connections that we have and how we can participate in that connection in a more aware and conscious way. Well, thinking about Valentine's Day, I think that Valentine's Day is about connecting. And I came across a cute little story about my couple of kids who said, my sister and I decided to send a Valentine one year, so supposedly from our mother, to a judge whom we had reason to believe was already making discreet advances. And so we put our thinking caps on and pretty soon thought of a good verse. It had a new word in it that we had heard in Sunday school. And we weren't sure just what it meant, but decided it was in the Bible, so it must be a good word. And since it was used about King Solomon, it was bound to be romancy enough for a Valentine. And the Valentine the judge received was lovely, and it was bedecked with paper lace and arrow-pierced hearts. And the verse within read simply, "If you will be my Valentine, I'll be your concubine." It's in the Bible, it's got to be good, right? Oh, and I read another place, someone said, I don't understand why Cupid was chosen to represent Valentine's Day. When I think about romance, the last thing in my mind is a short, chubby toddler coming at me with a weapon. Well, Valentine's Day, of course, is about love. And today we're going to really talk about not just love, but this amazing, amazing world that we live in, and this universe that we live in, and the connection that we have with it. For centuries, Western culture has taught us to think of ourselves as individuals. Competition, assumed to be the most fundamental human urge, is the basis of much of our society in most modern developed countries. It's the engine of our economy, and it's assumed to be the basis of most of our relationships in business and our neighbors and even oftentimes our closest friends. But there's an entirely different understanding that's coming about not only through spiritual ways, but also in scientific circles as well. Much of our understanding and much of this idea of competition being the most important and driving force has come from science in one way or another. And many of the scientific doctrines and dogmas have basically said, and much of it comes from the work of Darwin, that life is the survival of the fittest. And there's this term of it's a dog-eat-dog world. Well, I think about that, and I have never known of a dog eating a dog. That somebody made that up. I'm telling you, it is not the way it is. And it's not the way nature is. And that's what we're seeing, and not only in the spiritual circles, and I always love how spirituality and science does come together. It really speaks to me on the other levels to really recognize that in many ways, science is oftentimes beginning to recognize what has been said by the mystics for thousands of years. But it really helps in many ways to help us to get it into our awareness on another level when we can really look at some of the scientific understandings of these different awarenesses and principles. See, a lot of the research that's being done in quantum physics is really showing us that we live in a universe that is more related to an energy and a connection that we have. See, science for probably from the beginning has taken an approach of trying to break things down to their smallest components. That's really one of the essences of a scientific approach, is to find out what is the basic element, what is the basis of everything, and what is really at the heart and the core of everything. Well, the truth of the matter is we do that in spirituality as well, but we recognize that there's something more than the physical aspects of this. But in science, one of the things that they have always done is try to break things down into the smallest components. And so at one point, there was a discovery of the atom. Remember, I remember when I was a kid, people talking about the atom. And you see this little, and you have this model that was created of like a little solar system. And everything is made up of atoms. And so that's the smallest particle. But then they discovered that even in the atom, there are things that are smaller. And they were finding that there was a nucleus and protons and neutrons, and then they discovered that even in those there's something smaller, and in something smaller. And so the analogy is really kind of like, you've seen these Russian dolls. Have you seen the Russian doll where there's a doll within a doll within a doll? That's what they have really discovered over and over again with a lot of the science that we see today, is that you keep going deeper and deeper, and there's still something else smaller. And so ultimately, the idea behind quantum physics is an understanding that you're never actually going to find, ultimately, what is a smallest particle. What you're going to find is that there are levels of waves and energies. And so, as we begin to look at this understanding, we can see that we are really subatomically, there's no such thing. And this is the kind of really great idea that she proposes here. Ultimately, when we really look at everything on a subatomic level, there's no such thing as a thing. There's no such thing as a thing. Everything that you try to bring it down to, there's something else underneath it. And so ultimately, there is an unknowing that is there. They've come to the realization that the smallest element, there is no smallest element. There's no such thing as a thing. Isn't that a great concept, though, to think about? We have a tendency to look at our world based upon a thinking that recognizes something as a thing. We have we believe that the things that we see out in the world are actually things. We actually do that with each other, for that matter. We do that with people. We think that we are things. There's a way of thinking that's been ingrained in our way of seeing life, that somehow I am me, you are you, and we're both separate things. But even science is beginning to show that that's just not the case. There really is no place where you and I leave off, in truth, from a subatomic level. Ultimately, we are all amazingly connected, infinitely connected. I look at it also from a spiritual perspective, and one of my wonderful inspirations for many years was J. Sig Paulson. How many of you are familiar with J. Sig Paulson? J. Sig Paulson was the Unity Minister of the Unity Pyramid in Houston, Texas for many years, and just a wonderful, amazing teacher, a great student of Unity, a great student of the Course in Miracles, and a brilliant man. He said, when we become aware of the harmony and right place of all parts of creation, we will operate together as a simple being. In this situation, we could not consider doing anything harmful to ourselves. The brain of the world will not beat on its own hand. Would it? This oneness will be realized when the underlying will of the Creator is recognized as the central theme of creation. The will of the Creator is the central theme of creation. And he goes on to say in another place, he says, it is the love in our hearts that enables us to see and feel the wholeness of creation now. Now is the age we are coming together and discovering that we are never apart. Ultimately, everything that we think is something as a part of us. Everything is connected. And it's connected in so many different ways. See, our bodies, we have a tendency to think that we have these separate bodies. And from a spiritual perspective, we know that we're spiritual beings. And ultimately, from a spiritual perspective, we know that we are ultimately one spirit. There really is only one. In Unity, we say it over and over again. There's only one presence and one power in the universe, in this place, and in my life, in my body, in your body. There's only one presence. This is something that's been recognized in Unity for long before quantum physics came along and said there's really only one. There's really nothing separate. This has been a philosophy that's been around for thousands of years. I love it when science finally says, oh, you know what? There's something to that. And we can show it, which is another valuable thing of validating these spiritual principles. She lists some wonderful, and she talks about some wonderful experiments that have been done by different people. And I'm not going to get into all the details of the experiments because it can get pretty detailed, but it's actually fascinating to see some of the experiments and some of the work that's being done in physics to show how we are absolutely interconnected. And how everything that we are experiencing in our life is not just an experience that is individual to us, but that there is a collective energy and consciousness that's happening that is affecting us not only in our physical form, but is affecting our way of thinking, our way of seeing, our way of feeling. Our bodies are created, one of the principles she talks about is that our bodies are created in many ways from outside in, as well as from inside out. There's a complex interaction with the environment that cannot be considered to exist independently. In other words, when we have an experience, we're not having that experience in a vacuum. I'm going to suggest to you when we have a thought, we're not having that thought in a vacuum. There is a collective awareness, a collective energy, there's a collective consciousness that we're all participating in. Charles Fillmore called it race consciousness. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. We are all connected on a deep sub-level in a way that we're not always consciously aware of to everything and everyone else in the universe. And that there really is ultimately only one mind. There's only one mind. Charles Fillmore stated this so many times that really we're all a part of this one mind. We're all connected in it. And what we call our individual minds are kind of like, an example that she gives is kind of like knots on a rope. I mean, there's this wonderful rope of consciousness and there's like a little loop in there that could be considered us, but it's not separate from the rope. Does that make sense? It's a great image, I think. And so when we begin to expand our energy and our awareness, our consciousness, we recognize that even the very act of recognizing our connection, our oneness, is a part of creating more of that experience of oneness, that we're participating in that, and we're also being influenced by others in our lives and our world. In the book, Sig Paulson goes on to say, we live in a universe that is unity. It is a totality. It is a wholeness. Each one of us is an expression of that unity to the degree that we understand and accept it. And I got this great quote from Newton Dillaway, another wonderful unity teacher, wrote a great book called Consent. There is in the universe an incessant flowing, but also incessant ascension, or a whole-making power that is propelling all things to fulfill in wholes a higher series of wholeness. You might say that he's describing here evolution. But evolution has been a term that's been used in ways that really kind of talks about more a mechanistic kind of understanding at times. And so, but there's an evolution of awareness, there's an evolution of consciousness, and we are all participating in that, whether we recognize it or not, and we are participating in it in ways that we are either participating to move us forward in our possibilities, or we're actually participating in a way that we are trying to put on the brakes and trying to stop evolution from happening in some way in our experiences in our life. One of the things that they talked about is that she talks about in this wonderful book is there's some fantastic research that's been shown that getting down to the genetic level, getting down to the DNA, doing research with the DNA, what some of the research has really shown us more recently has been that we've thought that DNA was pretty much the determiner of our lives, and some have actually speculated that everything in our life has been determined by DNA. But the more recent understanding and research has shown that we ourselves and our environment can change and affect our DNA. And one of the studies that was done, I recall, she reads and it talks about it here, is that they did some research on the effects of nutrition and environmental experiences on individuals and showing how it actually affected their DNA. But in addition to that, it not only affected the DNA of the people in starving countries, famine, that sort of thing. They discovered that people in starving countries actually had smaller children. Up to two to 3 or 4 generations later. And that they needed less nutrients as a result. But in addition to that, they did some studies where people who had been starved were then given significant nutrition and healthy nutrition and healthy environments that it actually affected them not only, but also affected generations to come. And so the DNA was not set. It's not something that is saying this is how you will be. It's basically saying it is a tendency, but that tendency is changed and interacted by our environment. And there is a very clear communication between our environment and ourselves. There's a two-way communication. We affect our environment affects us. There really isn't a separation between us and our environment. We have a tendency in this world to think that the environment is just something separate from us. But the truth of the matter is, we are our environment, and our environment is us. That's true, I think, not only in terms of our environmental concerns that we have about this wonderful planet that we live in and are part of. We say we live on the planet, but that's not the truth. We live in the planet because the planet is more than just the dirt. The planet extends well beyond the atmosphere. So we are a part of this planet. We're not separate from it. And this idea, this thinking that we're somehow separate is one of the main things that's caused so many of our problems in our life. It's caused so many of the problems in our world. And so part of what we're learning to do is shift our understanding and awareness to recognize that we are not separate from our environment. We're not separate from each other. We're not separate. We really are connected. We really are one. Another wonderful research that's been done, studies. She talks about the effects of, there's a wonderful Russian scientist who, and there's a lot of, actually, a lot of research that's been done on this in Russia. This scientist proposed many hundreds of years ago that, that much of human experiences and behavior, it has a correlation between the activity of the sun. And there have been numerous studies that have been shown since that time. First of all, the guy was told he was crazy, and they dismissed him naturally. That's the first thing that usually happens when someone makes a proposal like something like this. But the reality is they began to do some research and found that there is an amazing correlation between everything that goes on in the sun and everything that goes in human experiences, to the point of economies shifting based upon different waves of the sun, solar winds and solar spots, and that there's a correlation between the stock market, even for that matter, and how the stock market flows and how it works with the sun. And it really fascinated me. One of the things that, and I'll say that she's coming from, she's actually a scientific reporter. That's one of the things that she does. But she's also very spiritual in her understanding. But she's looking at these things from a scientific perspective, and part of the correlation that she has said is, in some ways, that the sun is in some way affecting the activities that are going on here on the earth. And it's gone even beyond the sun. It's not even the light itself, but it's also the electromagnetic energy of the sun and the connection between the electromagnetic energy of the sun and the electromagnetic energy of the earth. Well, as I met a physician, I began to listen and think about this, that you and I are actually being affected by solar spots. A lot of our daily thoughts and feelings and activities oftentimes are being affected by things that are happening on the sun. Well, as I began to think about this, it occurs to me that perhaps it's the other way around as well. What if the solar spots are happening in response to how we are collectively thinking and feeling? In Unity, we understand that thoughts are creative, so it's got to be both. It's both ways. I had an experience when I was a kid. I couldn't tell you exactly how old I was. I don't remember exactly, but I remember very clearly this experience driving along on a hot summer day in Conway, Arkansas, and driving down the street, and I don't think our air conditioning was working. It was a hot summer day. We had the windows down. I remember this boy kind of half in and out of a wakefulness because it was just so hot and steamy and muggy, and really kind of in a reflective and contemplative kind of place. And I remember having a very clear image of a $5 bill laying in the grass at a certain building. And I had been kind of I had a toy that I was interested in and wanted to buy, didn't have the money for it. And I remember getting this very clear image of this $5 bill. And as we're driving along, I look out the window, and at this building that I was thinking about, sure enough, I saw something green out in the grass. It wasn't grass, a different color. Couldn't tell exactly what it was, but I looked closer, and I just knew it was a $5 bill. So I yelled at my dad, Dad, stop, there's a $5 bill out there. And he said, no, there's not even. I said, Dad, please stop, I swear it's a $5 bill out there. Finally, he pulled over. It got to a place where it was safe to pull over, and I ran back, and sure enough, there was a $5 bill laying in the grass. Now, some years later, I had an opportunity to visit with a very well-known psychic. And this person was the director of the American Psychic Research Center. And I asked her this question. And we were talking about some of the principles that we talk about here in Unity of how we create our experiences and that sort of thing. So I asked her this question: did I manifest that $5 bill, or was that $5 bill already there and I just tuned into it and picked up on it? You know what her answer was? Yes. And I have been contemplating that idea, that understanding, for years now, and it really occurs to me that that is the essence of quantum physics, isn't it? It really is the essence that we are not only being affected by and tuning into realities that already exist, but that we are also helping to draw those realities into our awareness, into our experience. And part of the work of physics, the quantum physics, one of the main ideas is this understanding that particles and waves act as a particle or wave depending upon observation. One of the key components of how a particle shows up, if it shows up as a particle or as a wave, depends upon whether it's being observed or not. And that the observation in and of itself changes how it shows up. That's true for everything that goes in our experiences in our lives, whether we realize it or not. That our observation of something is affecting that something. And how we are thinking about something is affecting that something. How we are thinking about each other is affecting each other. But it's also affecting ourselves, because I had this interesting, woke up this morning thinking about my lesson a little bit, kind of how you kind of half in and half out of sleep, and was reflecting on this talk today, and I heard my little voice inside that said, the universe is really the you-niverse. I went, oh, that's a good one, I'll use that. Your universe is really your Y-O-U-niverse. A verse ultimately means song. The universe that you see and experience, the universe that you're a part of, is an expansion and an expression, and it is an experience that is yours uniquely to you, that you are also helping to generate and create. So you live in your universe. I live in my universe, but the reality is there's really only one. But we're all seeing it from our own perception and our own perspective. That's a neat idea, isn't it? It's a good awareness. That's a good understanding. Well, I also realize that our relationships, and this is, of course, Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day is about relationships. And one of the things that she's presenting to us and understanding that not only from a spiritual perspective, but even from a scientific perspective, ultimately what exists is relationship. That everything that we see, experience, is a relationship. And I've done a lot of work and counseling work with different people in terms of relationships. And one of the core things that I have come to understand is that every relationship that we have is a reflection of a relationship that we have with ourselves. Every relationship that we have is a reflection of a relationship that we have with ourselves. When you look out and see someone that you're in a relationship with, what you're really seeing is the relationship that you have with you. But as I began to reflect on this a little more, and listening and reading this book, it occurs to me that that's not completely 100% the story. Because every relationship that you have is not simply a reflection of the relationship you have with yourself. It is a relationship you have with yourself. Because there really is only you and only me. And you and me, we're not as separate as we like to think we are. We are really, truly connected on all levels, both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There is only really one relationship that we're all a part of. And this is the bond that we're involved in. In A Beautiful Way of Life, another wonderful Unity teacher, Charles Lilly, says, every particle in the universe is indissolubly linked to every other particle in the universe. There is a unity of oneness. If we interfere with the communication between the particles, we temporarily cut ourselves off from the very source of existence. So we can actually cut ourselves off in our perceptions of connection, but in reality, we never do. It's only a temporary perception that we have that we're separated. Getting back to Sig Paulson, again, Sig Paulson's been a big influence for me. Somehow, for reasons unknown, other than he was really tuned into this understanding of our unity, so many of my references came to me this week from Sig Paulson. I was looking at different things, and there's Sig Paulson again, Sig Paulson again. He had a real conception of this amazing unity that we're a part of. He wrote this wonderful little poem that I actually memorized years ago, and it's really spoken to me over the years, and it really, I think, has helped me to think about my perceptions. It goes like this: the universe is one, so complicated and so intricately done that a song in the heart and a smile on the face tickles the atoms of outermost space. Isn't that great? And I thought about that in terms of the solar experience and the influences that it has on us, but also we are having an influence beyond even our world, and we don't even sometimes recognize that and know it. Well, another wonderful way that we can recognize our connection is that there was some wonderful research that was done on a certain type of monkeys, and they were doing research to determine neurotransmitters, how we learn, basically. And one of the things that they point out here and show is that in this research they were doing is that whenever they were doing a test, they were trying to see what neurons fired basically for certain motions and certain movements. And they were mapping the different neurons of the brain. And what they assumed was that, before a motion happened, that a particular neuron would fire. And they were able to map out the different neurons that fired for different movements and such. And one of the things that surprised them is that as they were beginning to set up the experiment, they placed an object in front of the monkey, and the very act of placing the object that they were wanting the monkey to grab hold of, the monkey's neuron began to fire. And they didn't see any movement. They began to control to make sure that there really was no movement. And they repeated this over and over again. At first they thought it was just a glitch, but they repeated this over and over again, that when they placed this object in front of the monkey, that neuron that fires when the monkey grabs the object itself began to fire, even though the monkey wasn't moving. And so they discovered what are called mirror neurons, that these neurons basically mirror things that are going on and are happening out here in the world. And it's one of the ways that you and I learn. The reality is that whenever you do something that is a part of my it's part of my awareness or part of my experience, when you do something that is, and you act in some way that is in some way a part of my understanding and awareness, there are neurons that fire in my brain that are basically the same neurons that are firing in your brain. Let that sink in for just a moment. So, for example, when I do something in some way that you're somewhat familiar with, your brain sends off signals. It recognizes, it actually mirrors exactly the neurons that are firing in my brain, even though you may not be doing the same action. It's simply reflecting back what is being experienced. And so we are affecting each other on levels that we don't even realize sometimes, even though we are not conscious of these things. We are actually triggering things in each other that we don't even know that we're triggering. Does that make sense? So we're triggering responses all the time in each other, and when we see someone, for example, whether we know it or not, we can be, and so one of the things that part of the research they were looking at, even if someone who is pretty much shut themselves off in some ways from trying to experience what other people experience. Anytime you see someone who is experiencing pain or suffering, you are experiencing pain or suffering. You may not be consciously experiencing that. You may be. I think that's in a lot of ways probably where empathy comes from, sympathy comes from. But when we are experiencing something joyous, the reality is those same synapses, those same neurons are firing in our brain when we see someone experiencing something happy and joyous. So we are actually triggering those in each other, whether we recognize it or realize it or not. It reminded me of a wonderful poem, and I was trying to look this up, and I learned this actually as a song when I was a kid. And in the poem, some of you may remember who this is by, but no man is an island. No man stands alone. Each man's joy is joy to me. Each man's grief is my own. We need one another, and so I will defend each one as my brother and each one as my friend. Someone look that up for me. So as we begin to really look at these understandings, we know on a spiritual level that every human story tells us that we're born into this world, and the only way that we get by and survive in this world is to be selfish, is to compete. In order to survive, we have to outdo the other. But the latest scientific research is suggesting that nature's most basic drive is not competition. It truly is wholeness. The most basic drive of all nature is really toward connection. It's toward coming together. It's toward bonding. It's toward moving us to a deeper place. All living beings, including human beings, have been hardwired to seek connection, virtually above and beyond all other impulses, even at times personal cost to ourselves. And so rather than a will to dominate, the essential impulse of all life is a will to connect. And so when we change our story about who we are, we change our perception of our role in the world. And by changing our perception of the world and our role in the world, we're actually participating in changing our world. We're helping to create a world that's based upon wholeness and peace. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder in Mysteries of Genesis, said, "The spiritually wise see love as the force that enfolds with mathematical precision the galaxies in space as well as the tiniest of atoms." So she hasn't related that the bond between us is love, but I'm going to suggest to you from a metaphysical and spiritual perspective, that's what we're talking about here. It is what really binds and connects and draws us together and moves us more into a greater experience of our possibilities and our wholeness in life and with each other, with our oneness and our unity with each other. And so part of our work this week is to really look at and think about in what ways am I living out a life that's based upon a viewpoint of the world that the world is drawing me toward wholeness. In what ways am I looking at the world as a way to connect, as a way of wholeness? What ways do I participate in helping to create a greater knowing and experience of wholeness in my life and also in the lives of myself as I see out here? The oneness that we're all connected with. A little homework for you this week. And we'll take that up in our conversation cafes for those who want to join in with us at. So let's close with that and let's move into our meditation. Take a deep breath now. Relax into that place beyond self, beyond individual, beyond me, beyond you. Relaxing into that knowing of connection with that which is beyond separation. Connection with an understanding and awareness of true oneness. Connection with all life. All beings, all worlds. Expanding that knowing of connection. And feeling an energy of love for all that is, expanding in that feeling and knowing of that bond. Of an ever-evolving and growing wholeness and oneness. Beyond the ideas of thing and self and non-self. And really opening to that connection with your universe. There is unity. Throughout your universe. Take a deep breath now and give thanks for that opportunity, that awareness, that expanding knowing of looking beyond the separations, the differences, and truly experiencing that oneness. Take another nice deep breath. Send energies of light and love and appreciate those connections in all aspects of life. And take another nice deep breath. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes.